My name is Arthur Hale. I am 95 years old now, and time has a way of stripping things down to what truly matters. At this age, you stop pretending you understand life. You simply remember the moments that quietly shaped it. My grandfather Chester once said a single word to me when I was 8 years old. Just one word. I didn't understand it that day. I didn't understand it at 20. I didn't understand it at 50 either. But one winter night, sitting alone in my living room at 82, after I lost my wife Ruth, that word came back to me like an old echo drifting through a quiet house. The word was kindling. Chester was not a man who wasted words. If you counted them carefully, he probably spoke 50 words a week, maybe 100 if the weather was good and he felt generous. When he did talk, he never explained himself. He would drop a sentence into the air like a stone into a lake, and then walk away, leaving you to watch the ripples. That day was 76 years ago. Chester was in the yard stacking firewood. Winter was coming, and the air smelled like cold iron and dry leaves. I was standing beside him, an awkward little boy with nothing useful to do and no idea where to put my hands. He stopped stacking for a moment, wiped his hands slowly on his work pants. Then he looked down at me. "Big log don't catch on its own, Arthur." He paused. "You let it go." Right. Then he turned around and went back to stacking wood. That was it. No lecture. No explanation. Just that sentence. I nodded like I understood, the way children do when they want to seem older than they are. But the truth is, I didn't understand a thing, because I had never watched anything truly go out. Not until I was 82 years old and Ruth died. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the rhythm of my life. The house stayed exactly the same. Same kitchen table, same chair by the window. Same television, humming softly in the evenings. Even the refrigerator made the same tired sound it always had. But something essential had vanished. When I woke up in the morning, it was nowhere I needed to be. No one waiting for coffee at the table. No voice calling from the other room. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that sits beside you like an uninvited guest. Every morning I made coffee and sat in the kitchen staring out the window while the steam curled into the air. My daughter Karen called every Sunday. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" "Fine," I'd say. She's a good girl, always has been. But after a few minutes the call would end. The phone would go back on the counter, and the house would return to its silence. Those few minutes were the only time the loneliness loosened its grip. Eventually the calls came a little less often. Not because she stopped loving me, because she has a life, a family, a world moving forward. That's the way it's supposed to be. But at 82, sitting alone on Thanksgiving evening, the way it's supposed to be doesn't keep a man warm. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was slowly disappearing, not physically, but quietly. The television was on, but I wasn't really watching. The clock moved forward, but the day never seemed to go anywhere. A person can disappear like that without anyone noticing. First you call it resting. Then you blame the weather. February in Ohio gives you plenty of excuses. Then you call it adjusting, then routine. But all of those words were just polite ways of hiding the truth. The truth was simple. I had no idea where I was going anymore. Or why. One December night, I turned off the television. The room went dark. The house was completely silent. And suddenly, that word came back to me. Kindling. This time it felt different. Not like a memory, like a warning. Something inside me was going out. I was sitting there watching it fade. The next morning, nothing had changed. Ruth was still gone. The house was still quiet. But that word kept circling in my mind. Kindling. 3 days later, I stood at the front door. My hand rested on the knob. The air outside looked cold. My knee was aching. I told myself I'd go tomorrow. I closed the door. And that's when the truth hit me. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't my knee. I simply didn't have anywhere I needed to be. And when a man has nowhere he needs to be, doesn't go anywhere. The next morning, I made a small promise to myself. Nothing heroic, nothing dramatic. I opened the door, walked to the end of the road, then came back. That was it. No music playing. No miracle waiting. Ruth didn't come back. The refrigerator still hummed, but something had shifted. That day, I didn't turn on the television. The next day, I walked to the corner. The third day, I walked around the block. 6 weeks later, I was walking 45 minutes every morning. Not because I was trying to get healthier, because I had finally understood something. The walk wasn't the point. The point was not letting the fire go out. Around that time, I noticed something else. Bills had started piling up on the kitchen counter. I had stopped opening them. What's the point? I kept thinking. But that's a dangerous place for a man to be. Because the moment you stop paying attention, you start depending on other people. And when you're in your 80s or 90s, depending on others often means losing the last piece of freedom you have left, your independence. So one afternoon, I sat down and opened every envelope. Looked at the numbers, faced the truth. Made a few adjustments. By evening, I knew exactly where I stood again. Control is a strange thing. When you have it, you barely notice. But when it slips away, it feels like losing part of yourself. One afternoon after my walk, I sat in my car and did something unexpected. I called an old friend from work. We talked for an hour and a half. Nothing important. Old stories. Bad jokes. Complaints about our knees. But for the first time in years, I wasn't watching the clock. And in that moment, I remembered the second half of Chester's lesson. You let it go. It dies. The walk wasn't big. The phone call wasn't big. Opening the bills wasn't big. But when I stopped doing those little things, something inside me started going out. When Ruth was alive, she held everything together. She remembered birthdays. She called friends. She checked on people. She was the warmth that kept our circle alive. Without her, I was standing in an empty room wondering where everybody had gone. But the truth was, I had simply stopped feeding the fire. Now I'm 95 years old, my knee still aches. Some nights I sleep only 5 hours. Some mornings I really don't feel like going outside, but I go anyway. Because now I recognize the feeling when something starts to fade. When Karen calls on Sundays, I don't just say fine anymore. I tell her about my walks. About the photograph I found in an old drawer. About the long conversation Dennis and I had about baseball. Small things. But if small things can still be talked about, it means the fire is still burning. That's why I turned on this camera today. Not because I have something extraordinary to say, but because talking reminds me that I'm not finished yet. That quiet little spark inside me is still there. Still stubborn, still alive. That's the kindling. Chester died when I was 27. I never got the chance to tell him I finally understood what he meant, but maybe that was never the point. Every day, the big log doesn't catch on its own. Marriage, family, friendship, self-respect. Even a man himself. One day you stop feeding it. You skip the small things. And one morning you wake up and the warmth is gone. For a long time I thought I had lost the warmth forever. But the truth was simpler than that. I had just stopped putting in the small pieces of wood. These days I walk before the sun comes up. The streets are quiet. The sky is gray. But that quiet no longer feels empty. It simply arrives early. And there's a big difference between those two things. If something in your life feels like it's fading, maybe it isn't gone. Maybe it just hasn't been fed in a while. So before I go, I'll ask you something simple. Not about your 5-year plan. Not about success or retirement. Just this. What are you feeding today? Because the big log never catches on its own. You have to start with the small one. Kindling isn't exciting. Nobody applauds it. But without it, nothing burns. I learned that at 82. Maybe you'll learn it sooner. Or maybe tomorrow morning. You'll just open the door once. The kindling was always there. You just have to place it on the fire, that's all.